Right now, you see white people and the Trump regime doing their big one because they are afraid of becoming the minority population. And they're going to. Studies show that by 2045, Caucasian ethnicity will be in the minority. I'm a millennial. I grew up watching something called TGIF. TGIF was a lineup on Friday night comprised of wholesome family shows. You had Full House, Step by Step, Boy Meets World, and Family Matters. Family Matters was not dissimilar from the Cosbys. It was comprised of an all-black cast. I grew up in a conservative Midwestern Republican household in Nebraska. And I remember one night sitting in the family room with my parents, and my mom just casually said to my dad, you know, one day they're going to outnumber us. And they were talking about black people. They were fearful of that. And you got to be really side-eyeing people in your life right now that you know who are super concerned about becoming the minority population. And it's just like, well, what's your beef with that? Do we treat minorities badly or something in this country? And that's why you see them pushing eugenics and the birth rate right now amongst white people. So, something to think about.
The US population is 334 million people. 260 million of those are white. That's 78% of the population. Before colonization, there was an estimated 15 million Native Americans on Turtle Island. That figure is now 7 million. 400,000 people were forcibly brought to America during the transatlantic slave trade. Their descendants now number over 48 million. Firstly, the Americans, the real Americans, the Native Americans, were genocide at the same scale as the Irish were during the famine. Same scale, half the population gone, 15 down to 7. In Ireland it was 8 down to 4. White people, settlers, colonizers became the dominant population in America. Native people were nearly eradicated, confined to reservations, reduced and isolated and forced into very strange boarding schools that required their own video. The white people who left Britain to go to America were not okay, and the things that they did to the people that they found there were not okay. The majority of these white settlers arrived between the 17th and the 20th century. This was not a population surge, but a strategically backed intentional settler colonial project encouraged by private capital. The US government offered not only citizenship but land to European settlers that went out there. White population growth outpaces these other groups, not just because white people had more babies, but because they had higher survival rates, still do, higher access to healthcare, education, money off the land, while enforced segregation made sure that the same quality of life could not be afforded to black or brown people or natives. What happened to the Native Americans meets the UN Convention on Genocide standards. Settler colonialism doesn't rely on just killing everybody. It's replacement theory. The settler state depends on the ongoing reproduction of the settler class, and the white nuclear perfect little American family with their picket fence is a core mechanism of American government state power maintenance. This video is addressed at liberal white American women who read about social justice, donate to causes, march for Palestine, but you still imagine that having children is just a personal decision. That's private between you and your partner. To reproduce whiteness in this country is to participate in genocide. You are repeating it, not through violence, but through inheritance. You cannot separate your fertility from the system that holds it. Refusal is the first ethical act. Refuse to reproduce a settler fantasy. Refuse to keep passing the same power forward. You have to stop pretending that your family is neutral. You have to stop pretending that your child is just your child. In this system, your child is carrier of settler legacy, a beneficiary of violence, unless you choose to make them something else. That choice sits with you, and it's do or die. Stop pretending that white America is normal, or that this life is innocent. The population structure of the United States today is built atop destroyed nations, stolen children, sterilized women, and a legal system designed to protect the white family, to continue unconsidered, unexamined reproduction. In that system is not passive. You are actively participating in colonialism. Reproductive refusal is a form of ethical resistance to late-stage capitalism. But this is not a call to antinatalism. It is a call to break the cycle of reproduction as erasure. Many settler descendants seek spiritual meaning, whether through God or otherwise, without acknowledging or confronting the material structures that you live inside. Without truth, reflection, repentance, restitution, your spiritual claims are empty. Continuing in 2025 to just do the suburban thing while ignoring genocide is not morally neutral. You're participating in systemic violence. This is not a blanket condemnation to motherhood or a denial of your worthiness to real human love and care. I am asking you to confront the reality that white liberalism is decoration for the most oppressive system the world has ever seen. And it is white liberal women.
Hey, what's up, brothers and sisters? I'm hoping that you are doing great from whatever you're watching me from. Now, in critical race theory and historical sociology, whiteness is not understood as a fixed category, but as a political and social construction that has shifted over time to protect power. And that's how it has been always used. Now, 3 centuries ago, like 3,000 years ago, during the height of European colonial expansion and early societies, particularly in the United States, white referred to European descent. And at that time, the white population was numerically stable and politically dominant, supported by land ownership, slavery, and colonial extraction. Now, because their dominance was uncontested, whiteness did not need to expand. It functioned as an exclusive identity designed to distinguish elites from enslaved Africans, indigenous people, and other colonized people. Now, as time went by, capitalism industrialized and empires matured. Demographic realities began to change. Wars, failing birth rates among European descendants, population, labor demands, and migration pressures reshaped Western societies. And this is where games started changing. Started changing. By the late 19th century and 20th century, the so-called white population in the United States and parts of Europe began to experience what we call relative population decline, which is not necessarily in absolute numbers, but proportion to the total population. And this decline produced anxiety among political elites who feared that numerical minority status could eventually threaten political dominance. Right. Now, scholars describe this moment as the beginning of racial boundary adjustment, where the definition of whiteness becomes more flexible in order to preserve hierarchy rather than reflect biological reality. So, brothers and sisters, due to that fear of population decline relative to other group includes Black Americans, Latinos, and these other groups, because relatively they started growing, and this posed a fear. And so I want to listen to people's contribution in regards to this, and then I'll be back. I'll be sharing my thoughts in regards to this. Brothers and sisters, if you're watching me for the first time, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership, and really get to what I can offer you. But until then, let's watch the video. I'll be back.
You ever wonder why less than 15% of the world's population feels the need to control 100% of the narrative? Because when you're a genetic outlier, born from a recessive mutation with a ticking clock on your DNA, you have to lie to survive. Let's get into it. Modern Europeans carry between 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's confirmed by peer-reviewed journals like Nature, Science Advances, and Cell. The Neanderthals were not some mystical master race. They were cold-adapted hominins who lived in caves, scavenged for food, and operated in small, isolated groups. They weren't the future. They were a failed branch of the human tree. And those Neanderthal traits still show up in their descendants. Lower sociability, higher aggression, light skin and light eyes, red or straight hair, high pain tolerance, shorter limb ratios, and a disconnection from nature's rhythms. They weren't creators. They weren't builders. They were survivors of harsh, sun-starved environments until they weren't. They died out. Not because they were killed off, but because their own epigenetic behavior, their limited fertility, isolationist tendencies, and lack of social cohesion couldn't sustain their species. Their extinction is a warning, not a blueprint. So how did they live on? Through interbreeding with Homo sapiens. And that's where modern Europeans come in. The Neanderthal ghost genome lives inside them today. And ironically, that same genetic signature they carry is the very thing they now weaponize to claim superiority. But here's where it gets deeper. Even some East Africans, like Ethiopians, show slightly elevated Neanderthal DNA. Not because they interbred directly with Neanderthals, but because of Eurasian backflow. Invaders from the north came back down into Africa, carrying their DNA, trauma, and mutations with them. And even then, their percentage is far lower than what you see in white Europeans. Sub-Saharan Africans, Indigenous Americans, and Melanesians, their levels of Neanderthal DNA are negligible to non-existent because the most melanated peoples of Earth didn't need to survive the ice by digging holes. They were already thriving in cosmic alignment with Earth, Sun, and Spirit. And speaking of alignment, let's talk skin. The light skin mutation in modern humans is recent, very recent. Studies from University College London show that the SLC24A5 and SLC45A2 gene variants responsible for pale skin didn't even exist until about 6,000 years ago. Before that, even in Europe, the original populations had dark skin, dark eyes, and curly hair. In fact, Cheddar Man, a 10,000-year-old skeleton found in England, had very dark skin and blue eyes. Let that sink in. Whiteness did not exist when the first civilizations were rising, which means the founders of Kemet, not white. The builders of Sumer, not white. The mound builders of Cahokia, not white. The creators of the Indus Valley, China's Shang Dynasty, Olmecs, Inca, and Maya, not white. So when people ask, what did white people build? The answer is simple. They didn't build. They inherited. And when they realized that their numbers were small and their genes recessive, they panicked. Enter eugenics. Let's name names. Francis Galton, the father of eugenics, cousin to Darwin. Charles Davenport, eugenicist who pushed racial hygiene policies in the US. Harry Laughlin, architect of sterilization laws. Ernst Rudin, Nazi eugenics leader supported by American funding. The Rockefeller Foundation and Carnegie Institution, they funded the research, the labs, the policies. They all pushed the lie that white was not only right, but endangered. So they legislated it, sterilized non-white women, separated babies from their parents, and drew bloodlines to try and purify the impure. Why? Because they saw what was coming. You can't keep a mutation alive when the earth is healing. When the sun returns to its cycle, when people of color reconnect with their power, when rhythm, not reason, guides the future. And now they're saying everyone has melanin. Cute. But next time, let's break that down. Because not all melanin is created equal. There's a reason they study eumelanin, neuromelanin, and pheomelanin separately. There's a reason they mine melanin from fetal tissue in animals. There's a reason they patent it, and there's a reason why, despite all their technology, they can't synthesize the real thing. So no, this isn't just science, it's spiritual warfare through biology. And day 7, we're going to talk about why they fear the sun and what it means for the
reducing population growth. That's this big benefit. The key thing you can do to reduce population growth is actually improve health.
In the developed countries, the big winners are countries that have shrinking populations.
I would like to reduce the number of people on the planet because there's too many of us.
When we invest in clean energy and electric vehicles and reduce population, more of our children can breathe clean air and drink clean water.
With too many people. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff.
Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that. We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. So in the next 5 to 10 years, for the next pandemic, we'll solve all those problems.
When you say the next pandemic, there will be another pandemic.
Absolutely. We don't know when.
History teaches us that the next pandemic is a matter of when, not if.
We know what's next. We're going to have another major coronavirus pandemic before the end of this decade, before 2030.
If we really want to prevent the next pandemic, and there will be one, there will absolutely be an outbreak of another pandemic. It may be next year.
We need more money to plan for the second pandemic. There's going to be another pandemic. We have to think ahead. We definitively will have to face other surprises, black swans, as they are called, maybe different kinds of viruses.
But also there will be a surprise outbreak.
Most of the work we're going to do to be ready for pandemic 2.
We're undergoing a soft coup, and the idea is to create a whole new set of laws and ignore the existing human rights laws and other laws under the pretext of pandemic preparedness and the biosecurity agenda. The WHO is developing through all its nations, but with the WHO Directorate in the United States in charge, a pandemic treaty and amendments to the existing international health regulations that will remove the human rights protections currently embedded in the IHRs, will enforce surveillance, censorship, get rid of freedom of speech, require governments to censor and only push a single narrative. Also, we will be subject, if they can make this work, to vaccines developed in 100 days.
We are on the brink, if not even at the start, of another global health crisis. And as a medical doctor by training, I'm appalled by the disinformation that threatens global progress on everything.
Okay, I'm gonna call on my fellow white people, especially like white USians and people raised in the white woman box, because that's primarily what we're talking about here. But anybody, I need to know. This says, what do you mean by white communities fall apart so often? I want to hear your stories. Stitch this or comment on if you were in a community of primarily white people that imploded. I want to hear it. Big, small, online, offline, could be anything from abuse from someone at the top to everybody disagreeing on what kind of yarn was best for a project. If you've been in a primarily white space that has imploded and gotten super dramatic, I want to hear about it.
I think white people think that other people want to be them. I think they think other people want to be white. They actually think that people are looking at them ordering Charlie Kirk's at Starbucks in a show of solidarity and thinking, God, I wish that was fucking me. They think people want to be like them. Bro, nobody wants to be like white people.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
In every lifetime, if I ever got reincarnated, I would choose to be black. This video is so funny because it is true. Like, white people think that they are the norm, the status quo, and that they are the blueprint for things, and everything outside of the scope of being white is not normal. I can speak boldly for the majority of black people on earth, and I will say 99.999% of black people. In every lifetime, if I ever got reincarnated, I would choose to be black. With everything that we experience in the world, with everything, all the history we have, all the racism, microaggressions, macroaggressions existing in this world, having to prove yourself, being better than everybody just to get an equal level playing field, I would always choose to be black. I couldn't imagine not having 20 cousins, having fake cousins, being communal, going to church, having growing up in my grandmother's house, having dinner at my grandma's house, having a drunk uncle that has hoop dreams at 50 who used to be a rapper. I couldn't imagine not having all the things that bring me together as a black person with other black people. Seasoned food, rhythm, music, clothes, swag, style, impact. I just could not imagine not being this person. So if you're watching this and you're white and you really think that you are the blueprint because the world has told you so, that's a lie, bro. It's a lie. I would never want to be white. Don't get me wrong. There are some people out there that have issues internally, self-hatred, and that's due to our history in this land and the world. But the majority of us would always choose to be melanated in the next lifetime. Have a wonderful day.
So, did you know that by the year 2045, white people are expected to become a minority in America? Yes, and this is all due to the fact that the number of people of color in America is rapidly rising while the number of white people in America is declining. By the year 2045, the number of white people in America is expected to drop to 49%, that is less than half, while Hispanics, black people, Asian, people who identify as multiracial and other are expected to rise up to more than half. Currently, the number one spot for people of color in America is taken by Hispanics/Latinos, which in 2020 made up for 62.1 million of the total American population. Followed by black people, which in 2020 made up about 38.9 million of the total American population. So it is believed by many that someday in the future, people who identify as Hispanics/Latinos might be the most present people in the whole United States. However, Hispanics being the majority will not be the first time this ever happens, because back in 2003, Hispanics broke the record and made Hispanic/Latino the biggest minority in the whole United States, outnumbering the number of African Americans/black people in America.
What exactly is causing the birth rate of white people to decline? Here's why, right? They're trying to make it seem like the reason why the birth decline in a white population is because of money or societal issues. Wrong. It's genetics. White people have the lowest genetic diversity. That means whenever a white person is having sex with another white person, it's like they're inbreeding. It's a micro level of inbreeding. And inbreeding, for people that don't know, it creates fertility issues. So as white people keep having children only inside of their race and they don't branch out to go get some new DNA codes outside of their gene pool, their recessive dwindles down how much genes and genetic codes your children are going to have. And when you're inbreeding too much, it gives you lose the ability to procreate. So now it makes it much more difficult for white people to have children. It takes on average a lot longer. It takes much more tries for a white couple to have children.
White people attempting to rebrand white rage by co-opting the term black fatigue as though it's a phenomena they actually experience but only recently found the language to talk about is both dystopianly weird and tragically on brand. The copying, the whitewashing, the centering themselves by playing victim. But what's ironically telling about it is that the concept of racial battle fatigue is not new. It's been around for decades, and the term black fatigue has been used by black people for quite a while. Mary Frances Winters wrote a book that came out in 2020 titled Black Fatigue, and it describes the mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion that black people experience because of systemic racism. Now, notice how black people didn't call that white fatigue, because the purpose is not to assign blame in order to justify bad behavior. It is called black fatigue because it is a harm that black people experience, and so their focus is on addressing and combating that harm. Whereas when white people talk about experiencing black fatigue, they are not talking about a harm that they experience because of black people or anybody else. They are literally telling on their own inability to live in society with black people. And that's not new either. That's a pathology that has existed for.
Did y'all know that by 2060, only 10% of the world's population is going to be white?
Yes, and they know that too. That's why there's been so many right-wing movements throughout Europe and the United States over the past 8 to 9 years. 2024 election is a perfect example of this. Think about everything that Trump has said over the last 8 years. All of the sexist comments, the racist comments, the disparaging comments against the Latino community. How he botched the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic that led to the deaths of over 1 million Americans. And with all of that, 57% of white Americans still voted for Donald Trump. 55% of men still voted for Donald Trump. The 2024 election had very clear racist and sexist undertones to it. But if you ask many Americans what it means to be white, they're not going to even know. So let's talk about it. 100 years ago, to be white meant to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, or a WASP. By the 1960s, that population started to decline. And with whiteness being a system, they had to adapt. So they included Jewish Americans, Irish Catholic, and Italian Americans into whiteness. During the 1970s, this was perfect. This is when people were leaving the cities for the suburbs due to white flight. Those populations could buy into the American dream. But by 2000, the white population started to become stagnant again. So what do? You adapt. And conditionally, light-complected Latino Americans, primarily Cubans, started to be accepted into whiteness. Also some Asian Americans, conditionally. 46% of Hispanic and Latino Americans voted for Donald Trump. 39% of Asian Americans voted for Donald Trump. Because certain members of those groups have been conditionally accepted into whiteness to maintain its survival and its supremacy. How do you maintain white supremacy? Well, you buy into it. And you absolutely can buy into whiteness. Look at Clarence Thomas, Candace Owens, Elaine Chao, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and George Santos. In order to buy into whiteness, it used to be don't say anything about racism. But now it's become more than that. When you buy into whiteness, you buy into colonialism, you buy into Western imperialism, American exceptionalism, Christian nationalism, and Zionism. If you're willing to protect those systems, congratulations, you can buy yourself into whiteness, which President Trump is the definition of. Because not only does he want to maintain it, he wants to accelerate it. Something that 13% of Black Americans, 46% of Hispanic Latino Americans, and 39% of Asian Americans also want to buy into, so they can benefit, even if they don't say they want to. But by 2060, only 10% of the population is going to be visibly white. So whiteness is going to have to adapt again, which it already is. By 2060, what is going to make you white is how well you protect imperialism, colonialism, and wealth of the most wealthy. How well do you protect the 1% versus the 99%? Keep that 1% extremely wealthy, while the 99% fighting for resources. That is what's going to make you white. We're already at that point.
I do not give a fuck if white people go extinct. And the reason why is because I'm not a white supremacist. I don't think that white skin is inherently better because I'm not a fucking idiot. I get so many messages like this, like, oh my god, like, you don't care about the white man, like, white men are so oppressed, and you don't care if we go extinct. I don't care. I don't care. I have dated people of all races. That has never been a factor for me. What is a factor is the person's vibe and personality. Most of the white men that I've encountered have been incredibly repulsive, racist, or disgusting, especially in small towns. It's not important to me to marry a white man to pass on my white genes. If I choose to have children and I have children with somebody with brown or black skin, the kid will still look like me. They will all share all of my same features. So honestly, I would probably be more upset about coffee going extinct than white people. I don't give a fuck. And it's not that I don't like the color of my skin. I love the way I look. I think I'm really cutie and just, I love my life. But I don't take pride in being white. There is a difference between self-love and white supremacy. I'm not a white supremacist.
They're saying that minorities will want to get even with white people once white people become a racial minority here in the United States. Here's the thing that white people don't understand. All non-white people want is to be left alone. So as the white population starts to go down and other populations start to rise, again, non-white communities want to be left alone. It's not about retribution. It's not about vengeance. All of that would have happened a long time ago. It's about leave me alone and let me live my life. But white people have this great fear of what not being in power will mean for them. And who are they? Who am I as a white person if I am not in power, if I am not the oppressor, if I am not the one making all of the rules, and having everyone do things my way? That's the fear.
So I just got back from the Quantum Fest and it was such a beautiful experience. I met a lot of beautiful faces. And the main takeaway, we had a conversation about returning to the source of creation. Now, as far as the topic of the Y chromosome being reabsorbed into the X, this has happened at a multitude of contexts. Because it is not only the Y chromosome that is being reabsorbed, it is also the artificial construct of the paradigm that we live in. So there was a study that shows that by the year 2045, the majority of the world's population will be either black or brown. So not only is the male as we know it being reabsorbed, but the same thing is happening with the albion or Caucasoid. So when it comes to the topic of returning to the source of creation is the primordial cosmic womb, which is dark matter, which is melanin. So that melanin, that darkness that condensed into physical space is the alpha and omega when the shift takes place. So all things that derive from that cosmic great mother, that melanin, is going to go back to the source and become one with her internally. So it's not about the male or white people ceasing to exist. It's that they will eventually reincarnate into the dark matter on a higher dimension. Because the only reason that the two exist is due to the densification of the spirit on the third dimension. The only reason that these mutations exist is due to the disconnection from the womb. So, due to that disconnection, antimatter was birthed in order to awaken the divine feminine. That divine feminine, which is the great mother, is chaotic. So, she is now on a mission to devour anything that reflects her dishonor. So, regardless of whether or not you see yourself as one, anything that is not her will be eradicated by the time it's all said and done.
So, historically, marginalized European groups offer an early example of this expansion, that is Irish, Italian, and Eastern European and Jewish immigrants who were initially excluded from whiteness and often racialized as inferior or even non-white. Over time, however, these groups were gradually absorbed into whiteness through economic assimilation, intermarriages, military service, and political alignment with existing power structures. And this process demonstrated a key principle: whiteness expands not out of inclusionary morality, but out of strategic necessity. This is according to W.E.B. Du Bois, who observed that whiteness functioned as a psychological wedge, offering social status and protection in exchange for loyalty to the dominant racial order. Also in that line, understand that in the late 20th century and early 21st century, this same logic became to apply to certain Latino and Asian populations. As birthrights among white Americans declined and immigration increased, elites faced the reality that maintaining numerical dominance was no longer possible without redefining who counts as white, and consequently, lighter-skinned, economically successful or politically aligned Latinos and Asians become to be rhetorically and socially positioned as model minorities or almost white. This inclusion, however, was conditional and selective, favoring proximity to European norms, cultural assimilation, and silence on systemic racism, particularly anti-Black racism, right? So, this expansion of whiteness should not be confused with genuine racial equality, because scholars argue that inclusion into whiteness often requires complicity in existing racial hierarchies. For example, certain Latino and Asian groups are encouraged explicitly or implicitly to distance themselves from the Black community in order to gain social acceptance. This process reinforces anti-Blackness as the foundational pillar of whiteness, even as the category itself becomes more diverse. Thus, the expansion of whiteness does not dismantle racism. It merely recognizes it to ensure continued dominance. So, demographically, this phenomenon is closely tied to fears surrounding the so-called majority-minority future, where white populations are projected to become less than 50% of the total population in countries like the United States. Now, rather than accepting pluralistic democracy, political and cultural institutions have often responded by redefining whiteness to include groups that can be politically mobilized against perceived threats, immigrants, Black political power, or demand for structural justice. In this sense, whiteness operates less as an identity and more as a coalition building strategy, which is embedded in power preservation, right? And importantly, this flexible expansion does not protect all members equally, because inclusion into whiteness remains fragile and reversible. Remember that during periods of economic crisis, war, or political instability, groups previously considered white enough may once again be racialized as outsiders. Historically, history shows this clearly, and it shows that Japanese Americans during World War II, Arab and South Asian communities after the 9/11, and Latino populations during immigration crackdown. This instability reveals the truth of whiteness as conditional status, granted when useful, revoked when inconvenient. So, this inclusion of Latinos and Asians into whiteness is best understood as a demographic and political adaptation rather than a moral evolution. Whiteness expands not because society has transcended racism, but because power must adjust to survive the changing realities. The central structure, where proximity to whiteness confers privilege while blackness remains structurally excluded, this remains intact because studying whiteness historically reveals a paradox because it appears to grow more inclusive over time, yet it continues to produce the same inequality under new racial arrangements. Also in that line, from a theoretical standpoint, people such as Michael Omi and Howard Wainant, they argue that racial category evolved through what they call racial formation, a process driven by political struggle rather than demographic coincidence. Whiteness, within this framework, adapts when its boundaries threaten to collapse under economic or numerical pressure. This inclusion of select Latino and Asian population is therefore not a random, but a strategically mediated through institutions such as housing markets, education systems, media representation, and political party alignment. And these institutions selectively reward assimilation while marginalizing those who resist dominant cultural norms, ensuring that whiteness remains synonymous with order, legitimacy, and authority, even as its composition changes, right? So, economically, the expansion of whiteness also aligns with neoliberal restructuring. As manufacturing jobs decline and wealth inequality widened, elites require new middle class buffer to stabilize system. Assimilated Latino and Asian professional becomes essential to sustaining consumer economies, tax bases, and professional labor markets. Now, granting these groups partial access to whiteness through representation, cultural validation, and legal protections, which has helped maintain economic continuity without redistributing power downwards. And crucially, this inclusion occurred alongside the continued marginalization of Black communities, whose structural exclusion remained necessary for maintaining low-wage pools and justifying punitive governance. So I hope you get all these concepts. I hope you understand my point of view, because it is really important for us to see and talk about all these things that are happening, right? So brothers and sisters, please let me know how you feel about this, right? Just let me know how this should be. Probably might be wrong, but this is a research that I try to look from different scholars and what they said in regards to this. So brothers and sisters, I'm your host and present in Tech Stories. And if you're watching me for the first time, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership, and really get to see what I can offer you. And for those who are always coming back, supporting my channel, but I'm really, really grateful for the support that you're offering me. But until then, I'm hoping to see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute. Salute.